UK's soft power and the UK's hard power to achieve the outcomes that the UK wants internationally. And soft power, as Minister Kim indicated, we also believe that soft power is delivered by a huge spectrum of cultural and educational assets. It's the system of democracy, the political system that you have in a country. It's a country's approach to human rights and universal freedoms. It's also demonstrated through foreign aid, through foreign development, and through trade and commerce. The more familiar things that we see a lot are through cultural assets and language and linguistics. The English language, for example, I think is one of the UK's most powerful soft power assets. It's also transmitted through education cooperation, through science and research, through the media, through digital technology, and increasingly through green technology and through health. And we're going to have a look at that a little bit later on. And then finally, through history and ideology. And so when we talk about developing or unpacking an idea of cultural influence, we shouldn't just be thinking of food and of sports and of arts and film and music. We need to think about the entirety of the cultural educational assets that deliver soft power for a country. Because it's only when we consider the whole picture, when we consider all of them, that we're able to develop a coherent soft power strategy that considers all those different aspects. It sounds like quite an obvious question. Why is soft power important? But one of the questions that we get asked more and more as the British Council by the UK government is, why should we continue to give you money to promote UK soft power? What is the benefit of soft power for the UK? And so over the years, we've done a lot of research into why soft power is important and what the power of soft power is. The first piece of research that we did, we spoke to 20 countries and we asked the representatives of those different countries, what are the policy drivers for pursuing soft power strategy? Why do you have a soft power strategy? And this shows you how the 20 different countries, the different factors that they mentioned. And you can see that almost all of them, 19 of them mentioned attraction, national brand, as Minister Kim was talking about earlier, all the way down to support for the domestic economy. And so you can see the overwhelming explicit priorities for soft power and cultural relations are support for foreign policy, for attraction, and promoting the national culture. But while domestic economic development might not be explicit, it's certainly implicit and it's certainly a huge benefit. For example, using the UK as an example, through the UK's cultural relations, through the UK's soft power efforts, as well as sharing our values on the world stage, the cultural and creative industries drive our economy at home. The cultural and creative industries last year contributed more than £120 billion to the UK economy, and they employ more than 2 million people. And not only that, but the cultural and creative industries are, or many of them, are future-proofed because they are creative tasks. They need creative tasks, which at the moment AI cannot do. So we believe that even though it might not be an explicit aim of soft power in developing the domestic economy, it certainly has a real impact. It was also clear from the sample that governments see soft power and cultural relations as a key tool to generate geopolitical influence. And a great example of that is China, for example, where the Confucius Institute network, there are many Confucius Institutes here in Thailand. I've visited several of them. The Confucius Institute network contributes directly to the Belt and Road Initiative and to China's broader soft power strategy. Countries such as Brazil and Russia give huge importance to geopolitical influence. In fact, in Russia's case, Russia said that it's particularly focused on countries within its sphere of influence. And other countries are taking advantage of that around the world. The South Korean representatives that we spoke to talked about South Korea's cultural presence in Brazil as contributing positively to its engagement with Mercosur and the whole of the South American bloc. And so also, I think in here, which it's not mentioned explicitly, but I think it's important, one of the drivers is to engage with diaspora populations as well. And there are three reasons, I think, why engagement with the diaspora is important. There are some citizens of countries such as France or Turkey, for example, who retain the same rights as citizens in their own country. They can still vote and they can lead civic engagement. They engage locally and they create economic value, and they are themselves ambassadors for the country itself. And trust pays. We've done a lot of research to show what is the financial impact of cultural relations and soft power. And we show that if the more engagement between a country and the UK, the more engagement between the people of a country and the UK, measured in terms of trust, has a direct correlation to trade and foreign direct investment. It has a direct correlation to student mobility, and it has a direct correlation to tourism as well. And all those things generate money for the British economy. And finally, I think it's important to see this increased focus on soft power in a global sense as countries more and more compete for influence. And you can see here over 5 years and the last decade, the huge growth in the number of Chinese Confucius Institutes. And you can also see that France and the UK are the second and third most represented countries overseas, followed by Germany. But again, there a huge increase from Russia. There are now far more Ruski Mir foundations and other countries that are also growing their cultural presence. And that footprint does not equate directly to influence, but it does equate to more visibility and more opportunities to share positive perceptions of your own countries. So in terms of trends, what trends are we seeing in the research that we do around soft power? And I think there are 5 brief trends that I want to just touch on in this presentation. First of all, perhaps I would say arguably the most significant change in the practice of soft power or public diplomacy in the 21st century has been its digitalization. Through digital tools such as social media and the internet or other tools, digital public diplomacy has become a new reality. And efforts to brand a nation or to shape perceptions or create sustainable relations have now very much been digitalized. And this has enabled cultural institutions and diplomats and organizations like the British Council to grow exponentially and to massively increase our reach around the world, resulting in more reach for us, but also in more competition with other countries who are doing the same thing. And although the efficiency of digital cultural relations is still being studied, the practice of public diplomacy has been completely transformed. And this is a process which goes along with the increasing participation of ordinary citizens in civic engagement through digital tools. I think these days we see that effective public diplomacy really has to be rooted in people-to-people communications. And fundamental to the success of that is building a relationship through digital diplomacy. One of the challenges with that we've seen particularly in the United States of America is that an increasingly digital media contributes to the proliferation of fake news, of a post-truth culture in public diplomacy and in strategic narratives. And that's reflected in the declining value of facts and the growing role of emotional messages and uncertainty. And that's definitely a risk that from the UK side, we're looking at what we can do to mitigate the risk around that. The second trend is around new actors, and I don't mean actors in the sense of people in your favorite film or TV series. I mean actors as in groups or organizations who take part in the international environment. And this digitalization of soft power has led to opportunities for new informal actors to engage on a much greater scale, and often subnational actors. It's no longer just governments who are putting forward this public diplomacy. Cultural engagement, cultural relations is now open and available to groups and individuals on a very small scale. And that's becoming increasingly important. And I think this can be viewed as a reflection of the decentralization of diplomacy and the decentralization of the soft power effort. And it stands in direct relation to other things such as digitalization and globalization and disruptive politics. And among these new actors, these new players, are also cities, as cities are now more and more trying to represent themselves internationally in the same way that previously countries did. Citizen diplomats, who are often focused on a single issue, and more power for non-governmental organizations and for civil society groups. They're playing an increased role due to increasing levels of distrust in governments linked to the post-truth atmosphere that I mentioned just earlier on. A third trend, I think, in soft power that we're seeing is the increasing importance of values and the increasing competition around the world in different competing values. More and more studies are seeing values as absolutely critical to the way that a country is perceived. And countries, often those with illiberal regimes or governments which are more authoritarian and have a different approach to individual freedoms or freedoms of speech, those governments are more and more seeing soft power as a way to cover that negative perception, to cover the criticisms of their illiberalism and their lack of respect for universal freedoms. And I think you can see that in the fact that while many countries in the world still follow the UN definitions of universal human rights and universal values, other countries are now starting to instead, rather than talking about universal values, are talking about common aspirations. And that's a much weaker term, which some countries are starting to take up because it means that they do not themselves have to commit to universal freedoms and universal values. And we can see this particularly in global middle ground countries, in particular in countries who are not in the top tier of geopolitical influence, but who are in that middle tier of influence. And there are many of those around Asia in this particular part of the world. The fourth trend that we're seeing in soft power is around audiences, changes in different audiences. Originally, soft power was aimed at foreign audiences, but I think what we're seeing more and more now is that soft power and public diplomacy